your micro brain on climate.
Hello, I'm Dave, and in this micro episode of Your Brain on Climate. Ooh, ooh, it's Halloween, so I'm being all scary. Ooh. That about bollocks, really, isn't it? Well, or is it? It's certainly a bizarre way to carry on. Oh, hello. What are you doing tonight, respectable person? Oh, you're going to cover yourself in tomato sauce and stick a plastic retractable knife in your head, go around your neighbour's house and demand some sweets. Don't any of you think that's a little bit strange? I suppose it is strange, isn't it? That's the point, right? No matter how commercialised and silly the whole thing is these days, Halloween traditionally always was the day of the year when people stopped all their usual sober carry-on and allowed themselves to be a bit mystical and odd, to pay attention to the dead souls and the spirits wandering around amongst us. In its ancient Celtic origins, the festival of Samhain, held on the 31st of October, marked the start of the dark half of the year, the equinox between solstices, the day when it was no longer summer, but not yet quite winter, an in-between a liminal time, when the boundary between the world of the living and the dead grew paper thin, and fairies and stuff like that could cross over. Most of today's rituals of Halloween, silly though they now are, hark all the way back to then. On Samhain, the ancient Celts, they wore disguises and masks to blend in with the spirits. They lit bonfires and they gave offerings of food and drink to the wandering dead. All of that survived as that festival was absorbed in Celtic lands into Christianity, known as All Hallows Eve, or Halloween for short. And basically the same idea. Ghosts and demons and spirits were allowed to be at large for the evening, and basically the same rituals. It was only the trick-or-treating bit that came much later in the Middle Ages. So even though these days it's all a bit of a kind of plastic grotesque of all of that, Halloween now is still basically doing the same thing. It's the day of the year when you honour the dead souls stuck in a tormented afterlife. When you look up from eating your turnips just for one night, put on a silly mask and allow yourself to play, imagining banshees and ghosts were real, just in case they are. It's a day when you would never normally get grown adults walking around dressed as werewolves. But on the 31st of October every year, it's allowed. It's a day of the year we're allowed to do something unusual. And that feels quite important, doesn't it? Still. All of that brings me neatly to someone who's made a whole philosophy out of noticing strangeness. The majestic, wonderful thinker that is Timothy Morton. I'm currently rereading some of Timothy's stuff again, slowly, because it's that kind of writing. Their work has had a huge influence on my own thinking, perhaps even this show. They talk about all sorts of amazing stuff. I commend their books to you in the highest terms. And one of the ideas that Timothy talks about all the time is noticing strangeness and how bloody spooky it is when you realise what's on the end of your fork. The words Timothy uses is uncanny. When you look around you and something is nearly, but not quite what you expect. Like Harrison Ford in the recent Indiana Jones film, de-aged to look like a younger man. Nearly, but not quite looking like one, and thus not looking like one at all. It's worse and it's way weirder to almost look like a human than not to look like one at all. So this idea of the uncanny has always kind of fascinated me. And I talked about it way back in episode 8 with the psychogeographer Philippa Holloway. It was a bit of an unusual episode. I loved it. It was a very free-flowing, strange sort of episode, all about paying attention to unexpected stuff as a way of living life to the full and noticing how constrained much of our ideas are about the world by culture, architecture, and what we're allowed to think, and by fossil fuels and everything that has created about our permissions. Psychogeography is about lots of things, but one of its core idea is going for a walk where you usually wouldn't to see what happens on the other side of the fence. And in this clip I want to play you, we talk about somewhere Philippa had been, which I think must have been very scary and very uncanny indeed, inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone.
It's uncanny. That's the first feeling that I had when I was there. So I went there to do research for the novel that I was writing and for my PhD, which was looking at effectively how nuclear landscapes might affect people's feelings and behaviour, and how that might help me develop a narrative and characters for the novel I was writing. So I'd done loads of research before I arrived. I'd looked at pictures, videos, played video games that are set in the exclusion zone. So when you get there, it's really familiar because you've already explored it. But of course, that sense of uncanniness is only from seeing snippets of it, from seeing representations of it. So the actual landscape itself and being in there and moving through it is a very different experience. So I can honestly say it's humbling, terrifying, sad, funny at times, mundane in places, really beautiful, devastatingly ugly at other times, a bit boring occasionally, quite exotic, because it's so different. So it's a really complex place, and it's so steeped in history and the kind of the palimpsests of what's happened there, and the people who are still suffering. Palimpsests. So palimpsests are. It comes from the old term where people used to wipe the writing off vellum and write over it, but you'd often be able to see what was previously written, kind of faded behind it. So if you imagine it as a layering of meanings, if you think of the landscape in that way in Chernobyl, you've got these layerings of histories, of communities, signs and symbols within the landscape that show all the different experiences and stories that have happened overlaid over one another. So you see this real richness of some quite awful historical moments, but also some quite beautiful communities and people. And so it's complex. It's complicated.
What does uncanny mean to you? That you've used it twice, right? And it's funny. I think I know what it means, but you're using it in a very particular kind of way. What does it mean to you then?
That's a tricky one. So uncanny for me, it's really that sense of something familiar, but that's not quite right. So it's the equivalent of seeing somebody in a crowd who looks like you, and for a second you think you're seeing yourself, but you're not. It's just someone who resembles you. So it's an experience a bit like déjà vu, where something is familiar to you, but it's also other and disconcerting and slightly off kilter. And so it gives us this kind of weird, spooky feeling, which is very much what I experienced there. I know this place, I recognise it, but now I'm in it, it feels uncanny, odd.
And is that all happening in your head, that kind of thing? Because one of the things when I see pictures of the Chernobyl exclusion zone on the telly, and you see people walking around with them Geiger counter things, and it kind of beeping, and then you walk over here and there's a little pocket of beep, and so you step out of that because it's bad, because you might get ill or something. And I wonder whether if I just picked you up and I plonked you in there, and I didn't tell you where it was, and you were just walking around it, whether it would just feel like anywhere else, or whether you're carrying into it this kind of all of your preconceptions and the beeps and the news and the story, and whether that's what's making it feel uncanny to you.
Yeah, so I think you kind of have to have an understanding of something for that uncanniness to trip. There has to be something that you recognise in it, some kind of sign that you recognise in it. So the interesting thing about going to Chernobyl is that you can't just go there. You can't kind of arrive there by accident, really. It would be very difficult. It's possible. I know it has to be possible because it kind of happens in the book I wrote, that someone does end up on the edge of it accidentally. But really, you have to go through quite a process of going there. And that process highlights to you the dangers, the risks, the complexities of going into that environment. So you're carrying with you a lot of conceptual information, ideas that you have, understandings, knowledge of the place that you're taking with you into that environment. I think depending on where in the zone you were placed, if you were just snatched out of one place and put there, you would have no idea that it was radioactive. You may not notice the subtle biological signs, like trees that have grown in a slightly different way, or the patterns on a bird's wing that show that they've developed over generations with levels of radioactivity in them. You might just recognise a forest, and you'd be likely to be more concerned about the fact that you were on your own in a forest and something might hurt you, or you might trip over, or you might get hungry or thirsty. However, if you were kind of appeared in one of the cities that is abandoned, in one of the towns that is abandoned, if you saw the radiation signs, you would probably have enough conceptual information to recognise there is something risky here, something invisible, intangible that I cannot see, but that is a danger to me. And it's that sense that you cannot perceive physically the levels of radiation. You need a mediating device. So the dosimeter or Geiger counter that does that reading, that tells you that there's something dangerous that might be harmful to you. With that, you're able to kind of read the landscape. Otherwise, you're not sure whether you're being penetrated by radioactive waves or not.
I haven't managed to re-find the bit yet, I'll get there, but in one of their books I remember Timothy Morton saying that the best horror films, the scariest ones, aren't those that's all like jump shocks and blood and guts. It's ones where the central idea is that hiding in plain sight is something scary. Under your bed, or in your wardrobe, or in the place you always looked but never quite paid attention to. That idea is fundamentally deeply unsettling, like in the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain that we talked about earlier, that the boundary could actually be really super thin between all the regular predictable stuff of this world and something very unpredictable and scary indeed. Or even to realise that the scary stuff is already here, you just weren't looking at it yet. And Timothy says that's the right way to think about ecological collapse and climate change. Fundamentally uncanny, strange, a change in what we expect to be normal. The collision of worlds where our narrow human perspective overlaps, often invisibly to us, with this incomprehensible reality of what's actually going on. Something that's already here, we're already in it, but we spend most of our happy little lives not really seeing until suddenly we have no choice. When the real world stops working like it should, and everything is suddenly changed. I want just to end with thoughts and prayers for the poor sods in Haiti, Jamaica, Cuba, and the Bahamas, who've had a very strange, scary, and awful week indeed, who will have endured Hurricane Melissa, tearing through their lives, their houses, their towns, and their sense of what's normal this very week. Because these days, Halloween or not, if you really want to be freaked out and scared, try living for a Category 5 hurricane, mate. That's a horror story we increasingly can't shut the wardrobe door on.
Your micro brain on climate.
Thanks so much for listening to this micro episode of Your Brain on Climate. The full chat with Philippa Holloway is linked in the show notes. And a huge thanks to the hearty souls who chuck in a couple of quid a month to help with the running costs of this podcast. Thanks to John, who's chipped in since the last time. I Pay My Guests is a 100% listener-funded operation. If you'd like to join them, you can at wobblywobblywobbly.patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. And do please leave the show a review and spread the word. I'll be back soon with a new episode. And until then, look after yourself. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.